The fluorescent lights in that conference room were the ugliest shade of white I'd ever seen. Cold. Sterile. The kind of light that makes everyone look guilty. My father sat across the table from me, flanked by two attorneys in matching navy suits, and he was smiling, not a nervous smile, not an uncomfortable one. A smile that said he had already won, and he knew it, and he wanted me to know it too. "Natalie," he said, drawing out my name the way he always did when he thought I was being foolish. "You really came here without representation?" One of the attorneys, the younger one, with the square jaw and the expensive watch, leaned over and whispered something. My father's smile widened. I set my folder on the table. I didn't say anything yet. "Let me back up, because you need to understand something about my father, before you can understand any of the rest of this." Raymond Ashworth did not build his real estate company from nothing. He built it from my mother's inheritance, her family's connections, and 23 years of her unpaid labor managing his calendar, his clients, and his image. When she died, he spent 8 months grieving publicly and 6 months privately, transferring every asset he could into a holding company she had no stake in. By the time the estate was settled, I was 22 years old and I received exactly $14,000 and a string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. My brother Oliver got the beach house. I am not going to pretend I handled that gracefully. I didn't. I cried in the parking lot of the attorney's office for 40 minutes, and then I drove to my apartment, the one I paid for myself, working reception at a law firm while finishing my MBA at night. And I sat on my bathroom floor and I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to fight him for what was already gone. I was going to build something he couldn't take. The thing about working at a law firm, even in reception, is that you learn things. You learn how documents move. You learn how deals are structured. You learn which attorneys are brilliant and which ones are merely expensive. And you learn that those two categories rarely overlap as much as people assume. I also learned, because I was thorough and I was patient and I was very, very quiet, that my father had a problem. Ashworth Property Group had been over-leveraged for years. He had expanded too fast, borrowed against properties he hadn't finished developing, and kept the whole thing afloat through a combination of reputation, bank relationships, and very creative accounting. From the outside, it looks like an empire. From the inside, from the documents that passed through the firm's hands on their way to other clients, documents I had no business reading but read anyway, it looked like a house of cards in a light breeze. I did not act immediately. I am not impulsive. I am the opposite of impulsive. I finished my MBA. I took a position at a private equity firm on the other side of the state. I spent 3 years learning how distressed assets are acquired, how debt is restructured, how a company's liabilities can become someone else's leverage. I was not the loudest person in any room I entered. I was not the most obviously impressive. I was the one who stayed late, who read the footnotes, who asked the questions that made senior partners pause and look at me differently. I was building something, and I kept very close track of my father's finances the whole time. His name was never supposed to come up in connection with the Hargrove deal. The Hargrove deal was a commercial development. 12 acres outside the city, mixed use, the kind of project that gets written up in business journals. The firm I worked for was part of the financing consortium. I was junior on the team, mostly there to compile due diligence. And then one morning, I pulled the chain of title on a parcel that was supposed to be clean, and there was Ashworth Property Group, buried 3 entities deep in the ownership structure. I stared at that document for a long time. Then I did something that probably should have felt more momentous than it did. I picked up the phone and I called my father for the first time in 2 years. He was delighted to hear from me. He said so. He asked how I was, how work was going, whether I'd been eating enough. He sounded warm and paternal in the way that men who have never been particularly warm or paternal can sometimes sound when they want something. I told him I was doing well. I told him I'd love to have dinner sometime. I did not tell him what I had found. We had dinner 3 weeks later at the kind of restaurant where the menu has no prices. He brought Oliver. I had not known Oliver was coming and I spent the first 10 minutes recalibrating, the way you do when the situation is more complicated than you planned for. Oliver is 4 years older than me. He is handsome in a forgettable way and has been trading on our father's name since he was old enough to have business cards. He manages 2 properties for Ashworth Group and calls himself a real estate developer on his LinkedIn. He has never developed anything. He manages contractors and attends ribbon cuttings and takes credit for things other people built. He ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the list without looking at me. My father talked about the Hargrove development over appetizers. He was very enthusiastic about it. He talked about the opportunity, the location, the synergies. He loved the word synergies. And I listened and nodded and asked 1 or 2 questions that sounded like the questions of someone casually curious. Not the questions of someone who had spent the past month pulling every public filing connected to his holding company. By the time the entrees arrived, he had gotten to the point. He needed a bridge loan, short-term, secured against the Hargrove parcel. The banks were being difficult. He said this with a particular kind of exasperation, the exasperation of someone who has asked too many times and heard no too many times, and has now moved down the list of family. The firm I worked for, he said, had exactly the kind of capital structure that could make this happen quickly. If I could facilitate an introduction, put in a word with the right people, he would make sure I was taken care of. He said, taken care of. Like he was doing me a favor. I asked him how much he needed. He said 3 million. I cut a piece of my salmon and chewed it slowly. Let me see what I can do, I said. I did not facilitate an introduction. What I did was take a week of vacation time, fly to a city 3 hours away, and meet with 2 people, a forensic accountant named Ben who had done work for my firm before and owed me a professional favor, and an attorney named Catherine whose specialty was exactly the kind of thing I was starting to think I needed. Ben spent 4 days going through every document I had compiled. On the 5th day he called me, and his voice was the voice of someone who had found something worse than he expected. The short version, Ashworth Property Group had been systematically misrepresenting asset values to its lenders for at least 6 years. The Hargrove parcel specifically had been pledged as collateral to 2 separate institutions simultaneously, which is not legal. There were also transfers, quiet, incremental, consistent, from the operating company to a personal account that bore no visible relationship to any legitimate business expense. He's been doing this a long time, Ben said. I know, I said. What do you want to do? I thought about my mother. I thought about those $14,000 and the string of pearls. I thought about Oliver at dinner, ordering wine without looking at me, and my father saying, taken care of like it was a gift. I want to own the debt, I said. This is the part that confuses people, so I'll explain it simply. When a company is in financial trouble, its debts don't disappear, they get sold. Banks and lenders who are nervous about being repaid will sometimes sell those debt obligations to outside buyers at a discount. They take 70 cents on the dollar, or 50, or less, and they walk away. The buyer then becomes the creditor. The buyer has the rights the bank had. Ashworth Property Group had approximately $9 million in commercial debt across 4 lending institutions. 2 of those institutions were very nervous. I knew they were nervous because I had read their internal communications and documents that should probably not have crossed my desk, but did, and because Ben confirmed it. I did not have $9 million. I had savings, I had a salary, and I had 3 years of being the person in the room who asked the right questions and built the right relationships. What I had, specifically, was a relationship with a private credit fund managed by a woman named Rosalind who had been watching me work for 2 years and had told me once, over coffee after a long deal closed, that if I ever brought her something interesting, she would listen. I brought her something interesting. It took 6 weeks to structure. It was not simple. There were moments when I was sure it would fall apart, when the timing felt impossible. When I lay awake at 3 in the morning running numbers in my head and feeling the particular terror of someone who has gone too far down a road to turn back. But Rosalind was methodical and her team was good, and the discount we negotiated was better than I had hoped. By the end of it, the fund held controlling interest in my father's primary debt obligations, and I had a seat on the fund's advisory board for this specific asset. I was, in the most precise legal sense, one of the people my father now owed money to. I did not tell him. He called me twice during those 6 weeks. Once to ask about the introduction I had promised. Once once to ask if I was coming home for his birthday. I called back about the birthday. I said I had a work conflict. Oliver texted me a photo of the cake. I did not respond. The meeting was my father's idea. He had received formal notice from the debt servicer, Rosalind's fund, operating under a name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at, that his loan terms were being restructured due to material misrepresentation in the original collateral documentation. The notice gave him 30 days to respond, outlined the legal exposure, and requested a meeting at the offices of the servicer's legal counsel. He brought 2 attorneys. He brought Oliver, which surprised me a little. Oliver had no legal standing in the room, but my father brought him everywhere when he wanted to feel fortified. I was already in the room when they arrived. I was sitting at the end of the table opposite the door, next to Catherine. I had a folder in front of me. I was wearing a dark blazer I had bought specifically for this meeting, the kind of thing that communicates a particular message without saying a word. My father saw me and stopped walking. The younger attorney walked into his back. Natalie. His voice had changed. Not the warm, paternal voice from the restaurant, something flatter. More careful. Hi, Dad. Oliver looked at Catherine, then at me, then at the folders on the table. His face did the thing it does when he's trying to calculate something and can't quite get there. My father sat down slowly. His attorneys sat on either side of him. The older one, gray-haired, practiced, the kind of attorney who has seen a lot of conference rooms, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read immediately. Then something shifted in it. He leaned toward my father and said, in a voice he probably thought was quieter than it was, Is she the advisory board contact? Is that your daughter? My father said nothing. The attorney said, Raymond, did you know about this? My father's jaw tightened. No, he said. I did not. I had rehearsed this moment many times. Not rehearsed what I would say exactly, but rehearsed how I would feel. I had imagined feeling triumphant. I had imagined feeling angry. I had imagined, in my weaker moments, feeling sad, some lingering version of the girl who sat on her bathroom floor at 22 and cried until she had nothing left. I felt none of those things. I felt clear. There are 2 things we can talk about today, I said. The first is the restructuring proposal, which Catherine will walk you through. The second is the collateral misrepresentation, which creates significant legal exposure for Ashworth Property Group and potentially for individuals who were aware of the discrepancy. I looked at my father. We can talk about both, or we can adjourn and reconvene when everyone has had time to consult separately. That's your choice. Oliver said, What is she doing? What is this? My father put his hand on Oliver's arm. There was a long silence. The older attorney cleared his throat. Ms. Ashworth, he said, and the fact that he used my name, not my father's, mine, told me everything I needed to know about how he had recalculated the room. Perhaps we could take 15 minutes. Of course, I said. I went and stood by the window while they used the conference room down the hall. Catherine handed me a cup of coffee and didn't say much. She's good that way. She knows when to let silence be silence. I looked out at the city, the streets below, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of it. People getting lunch and hailing cabs and living their lives entirely unaware that 12 floors up someone was waiting to find out if 28 years of a particular kind of grief had been worth anything. My phone buzzed. It was Oliver. Can you just tell me what you want? I put the phone face down on the window ledge. Here is what I want and what I wanted and what I will tell you honestly. Because this is the part nobody talks about in these stories, I did not want to destroy my father. I know how that sounds. I know it probably sounds like the thing you say when you have, in fact, destroyed someone. But it's true. I did not lie awake at night imagining him ruined. I did not build this to punish him. I built it because I needed something that was mine, unmistakably, legally, irreversibly mine, something that no death and no estate settlement and no smiling attorney in an office could take away from me or hand to someone else. What I wanted from this meeting was an acknowledgement, formal, legal, binding. I wanted him to sit across from me and understand that I had been paying attention, that I had been watching, that the girl he handed $14,000 and a string of pearls had been building something in the years since, and that thing was now sitting in a folder on a conference room table with his name on it. I also wanted the debt repaid on terms that were fair to the fund, which is a less emotionally satisfying thing to say but is equally true. They came back in 22 minutes. My father looked older. It is strange to watch a person age in real time, but that is what happened in those 22 minutes. He sat down and he looked at me and the smiling was gone, not replaced by anger, which I had braced for. Just gone. Like someone had switched off something that ran on a fuel he had suddenly run out of. The collateral issue, he said. We're not filing anything today, I said. That's not the purpose of this meeting. He nodded slowly. What is the purpose? The purpose is for you to understand the position, and for us to agree on a restructuring path that is realistic given the actual asset values. I slid the proposal across the table. It's not punitive. Read page 6. He didn't read page 6. He looked at me instead for a long time, in a way I hadn't been looked at by him since I was maybe 9 years old, standing in the kitchen telling him about something that had happened at school. Like he was actually seeing me. Like he had forgotten, somewhere in the last 20 years, that I was a person and not a category. Oliver was reading page 6. This is generous, Oliver said, with the tone of someone who does not want to admit that something is generous. I know, I said. The restructuring took 4 months to finalize. There were complications. There are always complications. And there were 2 more meetings that were less dramatic than the first, but required more endurance. Catherine earned every dollar I paid her. Ben's documentation held up. Rosalind's fund came out well. Ashworth Property Group survived. It is smaller now, cleaned up, with no more pledged twice collateral and no more creative accounting. Oliver runs less of it. My father still comes to the office every day, but there is a board now, and the board has oversight functions it did not have before. I am not on the board. That was never what I wanted. He called me in November. The year was ending, the holidays were coming, the usual architecture of reasons to reach out. I let it ring twice before I answered. He asked how I was. I said I was well. He asked about work. I said it was good. Then he said, I want you to know that I understand what you did. I waited. Not just the financial part, the whole of it. He paused. Your mother would have been proud. I have thought about that sentence many times since. Whether he meant it. Whether it was the beginning of something or just words filling silence. Whether I believe a person can arrive at understanding that late and have it mean anything. I don't know the answer. I genuinely don't. What I know is that I said, thank you, Dad, and I meant it as neither acceptance nor forgiveness nor the closing of anything. Just acknowledgement. 2 people on a phone at the end of a long year, saying words and meaning less and more than the words at the same time. The string of pearls is in a box in my closet. I have not worn them. I'm not sure I ever will. The $14,000 became seed capital for a brokerage account that I kept adding to for 8 years. Slowly, carefully, the way you build anything that lasts. I still work. I still show up early and stay late and read the footnotes. Not out of desperation anymore, out of something I don't have a clean word for, some combination of discipline and love for the work itself, and the deep satisfaction of being someone that people underestimated for a very long time. My office has a window that faces east. On good mornings, when I get in early enough, the light comes in at an angle that makes everything look like it's made of something more valuable than it actually is. On those mornings, I think about that conference room, the cold white light, my father's smile disappearing. I think about the folder in front of me, and the knowing, and the quiet. And I think, I built this. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it away. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to become someone that the people who dismissed you can no longer ignore, not in a revenge fantasy kind of way. I mean, practically, mechanically, the actual cost of it. Because there is a cost. There were years when I was building quietly and nobody knew and nobody cared, and I went home to a small apartment and ate dinner alone, and wondered if I was just lying to myself about what I was capable of. That doubt is real. I want to say that clearly, because I think the version of this story where someone is wronged and then simply rises, fueled by clean determination, is not honest. The real version has long stretches of exhaustion in it. It has mornings when you read the footnotes of documents that other people skip, and you wonder why you bother. It has dinners with your father where you smile and nod and say, "Let me see what I can do." And then you go home and sit with the weight of knowing exactly what you found and exactly what it means. What kept me going was not anger. Anger burns out. I know people who have run on anger for years, and they are tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. What kept me going was something more like precision. The satisfaction of understanding something completely, of knowing a system well enough to move inside it, of being the person in the room who has read every page while everyone else skimmed the summary. That's a form of integrity, I think, even if it doesn't look like the kind they teach you about. It's the integrity of doing the work when nobody is watching, of not cutting corners because the corners matter even when nobody checks. My father cut corners for years, not dramatically, not all at once, incrementally, quietly, the way a structure develops a crack that nobody notices until the weight becomes too much. He thought he was being smart. He was actually just borrowing against a future he hadn't earned, and eventually the math catches up. It always does. Oliver is the version of that on a smaller scale. He borrowed against a name he didn't build, took credit for things he didn't make, ordered wine without looking at the people across the table. There's a kind of intelligence he never developed because he never had to. Nobody made him do the hard version of anything. And when I slid that proposal across the table and his attorney went quiet and the room rearranged itself around a new understanding of who held what, Oliver had nothing to reach for. No skill, no preparation, no document he'd read carefully at 3 in the morning. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it matters what you build your competence on, not the appearance of it, the actual thing. What I want for anyone who hears this story, anyone who has been handed less than they deserved and told to be grateful for it, is this. The gap between where you are and where you need to be is almost always closable to patience and precision, not luck, not the right connections, not the right last name. Patience and precision and the willingness to stay in the room, reading the footnotes, long after everyone else has gone home. My mother worked hard her whole life and trusted the wrong person with the results of it. I cannot fix that. What I can do is make sure that what I build is so thoroughly, documentably, irreversibly mine that no conference room in the world contains enough attorneys to argue otherwise. That's what I was carrying into that boardroom. Not rage, not a score to settle, just a folder, and the knowing, and 8 years of not looking away.